we shouldn't even do that much of meetings anymore. Just let us invest in the best tech company. And it's just a question of, having the opportunity today to prove in a financial state of point that the literature is true. Diversity outperforms.
Yeah, it's funny enough because, when we talk about women entrepreneur, it's almost like you have to always outperform like the norm, right? You always have to raise the bar so high compared to your counterpart, your male counterpart, which is very frustrating.
And even as the face of a corporation, we have progress to make on the shape of how we show up as a company, setting a goal by 2030 to have 50% of our company be females and female-led.
Because there were always a good excuse, there's not enough pool of women, female talent, etc. But at some point when we say, okay, we will remove your board director packages, suddenly there were some women to be found.
Is Europe ready to back its next billion-dollar businesses, or is the funding gap still holding founders back? This week's conversation features a panel I moderated in Paris as part of my firm Beyond the Billions billion-dollar series powered by Dell Technologies. We sit down with Fleur Pellerin, former French minister turned top VC, Tatiana Jama, exited founder turned investor, Stephanie Nenta, AI entrepreneur, Liz Matthews, senior VP at Dell. We discuss how late-stage capital remains Europe's weak link, why female founders outperform but still struggle for funding, the real hurdles of scaling in today's market, and how corporates are shifting how they invest and innovate. If you're looking for where the smart money is going next in Europe, this is the conversation you can't afford to miss. Let's get into it.
We will have a conversation. We've got someone who served in government for the longest time that has contributed to the La French Tech movement. We've got an innovator in AI that has been building in Paris and London, Europe. And of course, Tatiana, who many of you will know, is our counterpart here in Paris, working on SISTA, the NGO, to solve the agenda venture funding gap, and has also now moved on to become a capital allocator herself with SISTAFUND. And of course, Liz Matthews, Senior Vice President at Dell Technologies, who is going to tell us a lot about strategy, marketing, and creative experiential marketing. The future is in her hands with Dell and part of why we're here today. So let's start, ladies and gents. I mean, what we want to do with this panel is to really understand the landscape. For a lot of folks have traveled as far as Finland, America. I see some from Asia that have flown in. So we are excited to hear about the venture landscape, what the challenges, what are the opportunities, and how do we move forward, right? I think we've always taken as Beyond the Billion a very problem-solving approach. We acknowledge that there is an issue, but really we're here to highlight these leaders as experts in their field and to give us a little bit of flavor so that you all can walk away. You know, that the one thing I always say is, all right, what's the $1 billion move we can do today? What can we do to move forward? What's the tangible thing, as Liz will always challenge us, right, that we've done from this convening? It is really takeaways from your years of experience so that you all don't have to make the same mistakes that we all have made in our careers, in building and in growing, and, you know, walk away with something inspirational that you can expand in your realm of influence. So let me start with Fleur. Many of those in the French ecosystem understand the significance of who you are and what you've done. But tell us, you know, for those who are traveling far and abroad, how'd you come to this work as a VC?
So it was not very straightforward path, but I used to serve as a high civil servant here in France, and I was in the Hollande administration from 2012 to 2016, serving successively as a minister for digital innovation and small businesses, minister for foreign trade and tourism, and minister for culture and communication. And that's when I did this very radical switch to the dark side of the force, setting up my venture capital fund at a time actually where there were some women, some female founders starting Probably, I don't know, Tatiana, you will correct me, but in 2016, there must have been maybe less than 10 female partners in the whole private equity landscape in France. But at the time, there were some female founders starting their own private equity or VC firms. So that's what I did in 2016 when I received very strong backing from a Korean LP investor. And without this LP investor that invested in me while I had absolutely no track record whatsoever as an investor, I would never have been able to do what I do today. We have 750 million asset under management.
Bravo!
But I realize now, and probably Tatiana will tell you more about that, how difficult this still is to go over the hurdles that we face as female founders, whether that be GP or corporate founders. So that's who I am. And I think we're making some progress, but we're not there yet.
Yeah,
Right.
and Fleur, because you've had the specific lens of being a minister and you were very involved in the La French tech movement, which has become global, right? You know, we all look to it, even as Americans, in terms of the initiative that you have put together. Tell us a little bit about your sense of where the French ecosystem is. You know, that's always something that I ask a lot of founders. Do you think there's enough capital pool? Is the talent being developed? What is your sense of where we are today from when you started years ago?
I think there's been a lot of progress for sure. You know, when you look back at beginning of the 2010s, there was much less capital. The fundraising rounds, European players were almost absent. I mean, investors were almost always absent post Series B. So now you have a more mature ecosystem when it comes to the financing of innovation. But probably if you look at Europe as a whole, the funding gap between Europe and the US has closed a bit. But still, we still have I think difficulties in the late stage and the growth equity sector because of the lack of exit opportunities, because we don't have a financial market that is as efficient as the Nasdaq in the US. Probably less also deep pocket kind of corporate investors who can, spend billions in acquiring and doing M&A or acquiring a successful company. So it's still challenging, but of course there's a big progress that has been made. And actually the best reward is when you speak to foreign investors and when they say, when I look at France, today and where France was in the beginning of the 2000s or 2010, it's been a very big difference. You have very exciting companies. There's a lot of hype recently on Gen AI, etc. So you also see founders who came back from the US, big tech, and who are founding their companies in France. So I think there are good signs, but still a lot to do.
Yeah. And Tatiana, I mean, Flo was almost like, elbowing you there to give your comments on your landscape. I mean, tell us a little bit about Sista as an NGO. What inspired you? I mean, you were an exited founder. We talked about this. So you have that lens of a founder now doing something for the wider ecosystem. Tell us what brought you to this work and if you agree with Flo.
I always agree with Fleur. Nobody wants to disagree with Fleur. So I started as an entrepreneur. I was absolutely convinced that it was the best way for women to climb the social ladder. And I still believe, but the problem is that the funding gap is so huge that now we have an enormous problem around the access to finance. But it's still very true that entrepreneurship is the best way for women and minority to climb. I mean, it's the story of my family. So I was brought up by a mother that was born in Cuba and a Franco-Polish father, and they kind of made it through life being entrepreneur. So there's many ways of being an entrepreneur. You can be a tech entrepreneur, but you also can be other kinds of entrepreneur. And it's still a space where the statu quo is not 100% true, and you still see amazing innovators that come from outside. And I believe that also it's the case of women. So I was, again, absolutely convinced that it was the best thing that could ever happen typically to a woman. And it's a little bit what happened to me and my partner, because for 14 years we raised funds, we exited to Amazon, and that was even before Fleur launched the French tech. So it was an ecosystem where there was approximately 1 billion. Today it's 25 billion that injected every year and the French tech, if you take really the venture. So it did times 25 in a little bit more than 10 years. So it's still a huge step. I was very happy in my entrepreneurial kind of journey. I hadn't really realized that I was a women entrepreneur. In 2018, there was all these questions, and there's always all these questions about the fact that women lacked of ambition, and there was not even 10 women in the French tech ecosystem, and where were the women? So the French government asked us, a group of female entrepreneurs, to kind of think about it, and that's where we started counting, and we tried to understand the noise that was going in, because again, everybody was talking about the lack of ambition. I'm only surrounded by crazy ambitious women, very tiring. And I didn't understand what people were saying. And we decided to count, and it became like a very important motto that we needed to count women in order for women to count, because the cultural bias everywhere in the US and Europe is just huge, and you need data in order to kind of understand the problem. And by counting, I realized that there was only 2% of the venture money that went to women entrepreneurs in the past 10 years. And that was a real shock, because I thought there was, of course, an error. And I realized with my partner that we were kind of a statistical anomaly. We shouldn't have raised funds. We shouldn't have exited. We shouldn't have been where we were. And that was the beginning of SISTA, trying to understand why, with data, with venture capitalists, but also with entrepreneurs, how we can kind of co-create an NGO and try to change things. And that's when we launched So This Is the Initiative, which at the beginning was a pledge where we decided to ask the venture capital to back at least 25% of the portfolio with one woman co-founder as of 2025. That's where it all started. Little by little, I realized that it wasn't going to go quickly enough, and that really nobody really cared, and that I had to go get every euro myself. So I did. And I decided to launch SISTAFUND, which is a 100 million target venture fund. We raised a little less than 80% with amazing entrepreneurs, amazing corporates, with European funds also. And I think that all of them, and it's really a question that I would love us to discuss, none of them had gender mandate. We're all talking about the fact that, of course, we need pledge, of course, we need money, but we really need money. And we have amazing opportunities. Like at the beginning, everybody, when I started the fund, everybody says that, we didn't have enough women entrepreneurs. We received 225 decks that are more like crazy, one from another. We invested in 9 amazing companies, or 3 companies. Our first company announced publicly a funding of 150 million this morning. It's the exploration company. It's launched by Hélène Huby, which is a Franco-German entrepreneur. And I guess that living it's just for me absurd, because I'm not helping anyone. I'm just taking an amazing opportunities where tomorrow, and you said it, most of the unicorns are going to be female led. So we shouldn't even do that much of meetings anymore. Just let us invest in the best tech company. And it's just a question of having the opportunity today to prove in a financial state of point that the literature is true. Diversity outperforms, and female-led company return better than all male companies.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of our convenings has always been focused on catalyzing capital, right? We're not here to just talk among ourselves, but we're actually convening the movers and shakers to allocate capital. And we have gone beyond $1 billion. Stephanie, you are living it as a founder yourself, building in the future. Tell us a little bit about your experience. We talked a little bit about your fundraising journey as well, and some of the challenges, how you've had to rethink your strategy. And you come from a bit of a track record, actually, which people discount.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Tell us more.
Yeah, it's funny enough because, when we talk about women entrepreneurs, it's almost like you have to always outperform like the norm, right? You always have to raise the bar so high compared to your counterpart, your male counterpart, which is very frustrating. But anyway, here we are. So I come from an entrepreneurial background in Cameroon, a country in Central Africa. So I was raised with ambition of, at some point, I will set up my own company. I didn't know when, but I knew it will come certainly at some point. And then I did a sort of a conventional route. So I went to a business school in France, and then I moved to the UK in investment banking. And at some point, I got frustrated because I didn't see things progressing the way I wanted. There was the crisis as well. I don't know if some people are familiar, but 2013, there was also the European crisis. So all that sort of forced me to rethink about what I want to do next. And entrepreneurship was one of the things that I always wanted to do. So I jumped. And the first thing that I had to tackle was raising money, because I was very ambitious. I wanted to create a startup using AI to optimize the HR process. The problem with that is capital intensive. So that means upfront, you have to make a huge investment. As a female, when you come, to investor, unfortunately, is male dominated, as people have already been echoing. It's almost like you have the imposter syndrome when you talk to investor, because they always think that you are not capable of delivering those type of very high value type of products. So you always have a double challenge of not only convincing about your innovative tech, but on top of it, you also have to convince that you are the proper entrepreneur to take it, to the next level. So that came with a lot of hurdle. Thankfully, I had to obviously do a bit of compromise, because I have to build also with another co-founder, which helped a lot, I have to say. That took me a lot of more time that I would have wanted initially, fundraise the money, but I got it anyway. And right now, Xtramile has processed more than 7 million job offer across France, but also in Europe. Thank you. Thank you. We work with a large company like the Tree Branch of the French Army. With large company, at the moment we have about 25 people in the company. So the company was initially incorporated in France. I moved to London a couple of months ago to expand outside France. So my sense is, as women, you have much more challenge than men, not only on the fundraising, but to convince people to actually, follow you. But when you get it done, people are actually amazed.
Yeah, yeah. So getting it done, I mean, Liz, you come to this from the role of a corporate, and of course, Dell has been a front runner in supporting a lot of these initiatives. What are your thoughts here as you're listening to these movers and shakers talk about the challenges, opportunities, and yet still getting it done?
Yeah, so many thoughts because I run the global brand of Dell, and entrepreneurship is core to who we are as a company. We wouldn't exist as a company if it weren't for an entrepreneurial spirit. What's interesting is I was on the team many years ago that created the Dell Women's Entrepreneur Network. So part of that founding team. And I loved what you said, which is the data is so clear. And yet we need to continue to have the conversations about the importance of access to capital and changing the conversations, access to networking and access to the resources. And while the data will show we've made progress, that progress is slow. And so we need to continue to have these conversations because I know this to be true. Women are a powerful force not only in the startup community, but also in corporations. I see it every day. And even as the face of a corporation, we have progress to make on the shape of how we show up as a company, setting a goal by 2030 to have 50% of our company be females and female led. We're not there yet. We've got work to do, but it's still a really important goal. So I'm struck by the progress in the conversation, the data that shows how far we've come. And yet, so many of the same themes that drove Dell Technologies to have this conversation and to invest in startups, because we know when women are behind companies, those companies give more back to the community, they're more successful, and they drive more business around them. It's why we got into it, because we saw that data and we recognized it. And we cannot stop the conversation and we cannot stop the progress.
Yeah, and Fleur, I mean, part of your work at La French Tech was this storytelling that we were talking about. Yes, we're frustrated. We need to get the action done, and we need to get capital moving. But what are your thoughts here on where the narrative is today? I'd be curious to hear later from you, Tatiana, as well. You know, we work with over 120 funds today. Some markets have been extremely challenging, where they've decided that they just didn't want to be a female focused fund. They just were women doing great work. Many of the top entrepreneurs that they invested in happened to be women. And they, by just changing the name of their fund from Women Fund Something to just fund, LPs changed their tact.
Oh, of course.
LPs were more open to looking at the deals. What are your thoughts here, Flo, on the storytelling, the narrative in France and Europe?
You know, Tatiana was talking about the sister pledge. I signed the sister pledge as a GP company, right? I've not been very efficient in executing this pledge, because when I look at my portfolio today, I have to admit, and I'm not proud of it, but we're doing late stage tech deals, pan-European and also a bit in Korea. In the actual portfolio, I think I have like 2 maximum out of more than 20 companies that are female founded or co-founded. And in the deal flow, I see very few companies founded by females. So we're talking about a female founded GP, right? So I would love to do more. I think in the sector, in the tech space, it's very complicated. Even I think Sista is also, the fund is also doing tech, right? But maybe more early stage. And I think it's the problem of this sector, because now we are diversifying, as I was explaining a bit earlier, and I have a great new female partner who is in the room. And the deal flow that we have, because we will invest in consumer brands, in that case, we have a much more balanced deal flow than we have seen tech. So it's probably it has something to do with the profile of the founders in the tech sector. When I was working on the French tech and trying to attract capital and build the VC ecosystem and the startup ecosystem, we were not having this gender approach, right? We just wanted the sector to be more vibrant and to create the right environment for founders, whether they be male or female, to be able to fund their company and fund their journey. But now when I look at the difficulty that is still, there, even after all these pledges, even after all these good, speeches, analysis and diagnosis, I don't think we've made much progress in the past 5 years, honestly.
So what does it take? I mean,
Thanks for the good news.
No, but what has been successful in France, and we were discussing that just earlier, is the public policy that was put in place to create more gender balance in the board positions. Almost 15 years ago, at the time, there were probably less than 5% women in all the CAC 40 board positions. Now today, we are at 40% because there was a law that was passed that made it mandatory to comply, but that gave like a 10 years period to comply. So it was a very long period. And then there was not really a direct sanction, but they said, and it was very smart, the lawmakers, they said, okay, we don't give you a sanction if you don't comply, but please know that all the board that will not comply will not be able to serve board compensation. So then the people thought, oh my God, because there were always a good excuse, oh, there's not enough pool of women, female talent, etc. But at some point when we said, okay, we will remove your board director packages, suddenly there were some women to be found.
Yeah.
And so this kind of thing was a very strong incentive to find solutions. But I'm not sure there could be an equivalent to solve the funding gap without this kind of, very strong incentives with a carrot and a stick or both. It's very difficult to change situations because just people, keep doing as they've always done.
Yeah. So 2 threads I want to go down that you brought out very nicely, Fleur, is one is what does it actually take to change the landscape, right? What are the incentives that we need to rethink? I mean, the example of the board compensation, at the end of the day, right? Money talks. That's why we're beyond the billion. We've only focused on capital. Yes, acceleration, building the pipeline of talent, all of that is important, but nothing's going to change unless the landscape for capital changes. And what we've been doing is actually working more with LPs, of which you all are the beneficiaries, to say, hey, we want to see more women in your portfolio as a condition of your capital. And we'll tell you, wherever we go, whether that's Helsinki in Finland to Asia, Singapore, the moment the LPs say they want to invest in funds looking for women, the narrative changes. So I like how you're bringing that up here. And I want to challenge, I guess, maybe Tatiana, you've been at this, you've cracked your head. I know the frustration as a sister to you. What do you think is the opportunity here? Like, how can we be creative in this ecosystem to make things different?
100%. I mean, aligned with what Fleur said. We launched in 2019 a pledge. Everybody was very excited. Everybody said that again, there was a before and an after Sista because the numbers were out there. Before it was okay to have, an all men's picture. And now it's not okay. Before it was okay to have that kind of statistics. Now it's not okay, but people kind of hide them. I don't know how they figure it out, but they still do. And at one point, it depends on the ecosystem, of course. But in France, we have a very particular ecosystem where BPI has an amazing role. Again, in the US, the pension funds, I mean, every ecosystem is very different. But in our case, we firmly believe that quotas are the solution. So before, there's always has been an excuse. And since there's quotas, they find women. They don't find excuse anymore. They'll find women. And the only way for things to change, dramatically is just to make it mandatory. Nothing's going to change at one point. Everybody gets the exact same amount of money, whoever and whatever they fund. What happened in 10 years around the climate conscious is huge. And it makes a point where you realize that it's possible. When you have legislation, when you have everybody that gets around the table and are obliged to do things, they do it because they don't have another way. So I think that if we could, and that's a little bit what's happening with the European Fund, they are creating gender mandate, saying that whenever the fund that has a 30% of women, they get a little bit more funding. And that's a huge way, of course, of attracting more LPs, but also more funders. Typically, in my case, again, I think that we were benchmarked on exactly the same track records, the same metrics than the other teams, which is absurd when you still have an ambition where there's impact. The impact is to say if you have 100 million that goes to women, you have more access to funding, and you accelerate equality by reinforcing economical power. And it's just that it's very long, and we're very happy that, we were the first one. I mean, of course, I'm proud of being the largest European fund on the subject. And at the same time, I find it really weird.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
there's tons of women VC that have been, in the industry for 20 years, and they can, of course, launch funds if they have the opportunity to go to very particular VC, Europeans or others institutional, that will give them a little more funding because they have the special attention. I mean, that would, of course, drastically change things.
Yeah. And so I want to take this, pulling the thread on the second point, which is pattern of success, and bring this to you, Stephanie. You look at bias in HR, and I want to take it to, this issue, challenge you to take it to this issue a little bit. Fleur started with no track record, right? And one of the challenges that a lot of female GPs face is that, look, women and people of color do not come from the same position of privilege where we were able to call dad to say, hey, wire me 250,000, I'll give me my first million to get started. And so we come from a different starting point. And one of the things we at Beyond the Billion have realized is working with LPs like BPI France, and I know they're in the audience here today, Anne and Adeline, but it is re-evaluating the pattern of success. That you cannot be using a system that did not serve all of us around the room here today. What are your thoughts here, taking your creative mindset as an entrepreneur, working on bias into this issue?
I mean, in our case, for example, at Xtramile, we tried to, and this was not done by design. It was actually what we came up with. But it turns out that we have 50% of our talent pool, which were female. What I mean by female, we have a developer, data scientist, because I think we gave the chance to everybody. We did at some point, we had to upskill some people in the team in order for them to get to a point where they will be comfortable, for example, data scientist role. Even if is to say I will provide objective to that person in the long run, not necessarily short term, because we know that usually, and this is a statistic, women who actually succeed in a role tend to be more loyal to a company than male. That is a reality, I'm telling you. So this is something that we did internally. But if we sort of try to push the envelope and try to see how does that fit in the bigger picture, I think as a startup or entrepreneur, as the same thing as the GP and the LP did for the pledge, I think as a founder, we need to give a woman more chances. Because right now, when you recruit an engineer, 3 out of 4 people will be men. And you have to think about, okay, how do I play the long-term game as opposed to just short-term? And if you give a chance to a woman, even if she doesn't have the right skill yet, and you build that in the long term, I think you open the door for more women get into the sort of the STEM program, if you call it that way, and actually believe in themselves to later on start a company.
And I just want to add that this is data backed. So with Beyond the Billion, when we did our first billion report, we were in the past quoting like Mass Challenge, BCG, McKinsey, Women Outperform, all these things. But years later, because we've been doing this for a while, we asked our funds to report back and reevaluate their own performance. And I think Shelly mentioned Go Be Partners earlier in Asia, which, by the way, some of you know, is still a lot more to be desired for women in leadership. But this male-dominated GP relooked at the data because they took our pledge and saw that the staff retention rates for women-led companies were outperforming a lot higher. Revenues were higher. Likelihood of a higher valuation was a lot higher as well, and profitability, so on and so forth. So this was not data we were giving them, that we were quoting from consultants that sometimes we love. But it was real data. They were counting themselves. Like you said, when you go and count and calculate yourself, you hold yourself accountable, things change. And I want to open this up to be an interactive conversation, but I want to end with one question. We can't end the conversation in 2024 without touching on AI. What do you think the opportunity is here for solving for this issue? How is Dell thinking about the use of AI, and how will that impact the work moving forward?
So I would begin by saying every company is a technology company in these days when you're starting, no matter what your product or service or output is. And the opportunity to embrace and use AI from the beginning, I think, is paramount. We talk at Dell a lot about this idea of a growth mindset. We ourselves, as a large multinational corporation, going through an evolution of modernizing how we work, how we use our technology. And so AI is part of the future. It is another tool. It will be ubiquitous. It is everywhere. It is disrupting how we work. And so I would say absolutely Dell is embracing it. Our technology is being designed to create for all of you, especially as we think about our small businesses and our medium businesses. And my message would be embrace it from the beginning. Those who have that growth mindset and are not afraid of it and using it from the onset, whether it is core to the output of your business or you're using it to run and start your company. It is an exciting future. It is one that we say sometimes it's cloudy, but you can see the light, and it is literally every part of how we're operating and how we're developing technology for our customers.
Thank you. And on that note, I want to open up for questions and answers. So this is a session where you get to ask these amazing ladies your questions. I see a question in the back.
We are speaking about tech companies and the lack of funding for female-led tech companies. But with my co-founder here, we are building a sportswear company. We struggle to raise funds because we are not a tech company. So funding tech founders is hard because you have less female founders in your deal flow. So why not funding more not tech-centered companies?
When I said that, I just added that we are launching right now a new strategy to invest in consumer brands. So consumer, including fashion, sportswear, accessories, beauty, etc. It's true that the deal flow is totally different from what it is in the tech space. And I can really compare the two because we have the two activities. So we are fundraising now. So we could start to deploy, but we're more focusing on the fundraising. But I can see already that in the consumer space, we will absolutely not have this problem. I don't have the exact statistics in mind, but I think that at least 50% of the companies, maybe probably more, of the companies that we see are female founded or female co-founded. So there's a very specific problem in the tech sector. And it's true that in the consumer space, it's totally different. And there are some, consumer specialists, but it's true that it's not the same pattern at all.
But just to answer your question there as well, we had a similar conversation recently in Sydney. And one of the founders that exited her company created the equivalent of Thinx, if you know Thinx, the period underwear for incontinence. And she sold her company for 140 million, of which she retained a majority of her share. And her fundraising journey was terrible. She had 2 herniated discs. She took 250,000 on credit cards because no VC fund would fund it in Australia, because the preconception built upon the American model, of which I come from, is that it's tech that makes the money. And so what I would give some hope is that even on that panel, the investors, the next generation, are rethinking what kind of returns can we promise? Because remember, again, when you're getting money from a VC, these GPs are pressured to give 3x the returns within a short period of time. Usually it's 10 years, right? So if you can promise that without the use of tech, there's a conversation to be had. But again, it's understanding that in 2 ways. I think for capital allocators, how do we need to reshift our model? Does venture work in every single market in this way? Perhaps not.
everybody asks us, if you're an investor, a founder, whatever, background you have, to be much more ambitious, much more funded, much more this. And that's why I decided to launch a fund focus on female founders. It's that by design, they're much more resilient.
Yeah.
Because if you're here, that means that you had to overcome so much adversity. That I prefer working with you than nobody else in the room. So resilience by design is what women entrepreneurs are building on who they are. And that's also why it's an incredible asset. And that's why you want to hire them, because they're just better.
I feel like that's a tweet or an X. Female founders are resilient by design. Let's hear it. So remember to tag us Beyond the Billion and Dwen, hashtag Dell Technologies. I have a next question.
Hi, I'm Lydie Catalano. I'm a co-founder of two AI tech companies. And one of my dreams is to use generative AI to build something with women, with ethical and responsible. And today, all the VCs want to develop SaaS, software as a service. And it's not possible if you want to build something that represents all the kind of people that are in the room. So what is the good argument to explain AI is not a gadget? It's a very good game changer, but it needs to be built with people and built ethically and responsibly.
Well, coming from a fundraising that we are doing at the moment, I think one of the things that we have to tackle when we talk about how we need to incorporate biases is the fact that I put myself in the shoes of a VC. They want to hear that your product is scalable, right? And the question about the SaaS, how do you deploy that? Because this is the common business model that they are more comfortable to, and they are used to actually deploy. And for them, SaaS meaning equal scalability. But on the other spectrum, we also have to think about AI as a way to make sure everybody's represented, like you said, and we need to have a more specific approach. For me, when I talk about AI, for example, in HR, I try to always convince investor that we are building something that is scalable, but at the same time, we also need to think about how to make sure there's no biases or there's limited biases. So it's a discussion that you need to have, it's a negotiation that you need to have with your investor. There are some who will tell you this is not necessarily something that I want to pursue, and it's fine. Sometimes you have 100 rejection, but you just need one yes. And it's that one yes that you are looking for, because, and this is the last thing that I will say on the subject. For me, an investor is like a partner for life. I mean, not for life, but you
For a
understand
very
my
long
point. For a
time.
very long time.
Very
So
long time.
it's better to find the person who's actually believe in what you want, the vision that you have, as opposed to take money from anybody and then they will put some hurdle that you will not necessarily can actually address. So it's better to be patient.
Hi there. My name is Millie Elvis. I'm building a lingerie tech company here in Paris. Tried before in London, New York as well. And I was wondering if you have any stats on how many female founders who are not first-time founders but not successfully exited the company.
I would encourage, one of our partner funds is Endeavor. Endeavor came out with a report on what a unicorn looks like and where they come from globally. And the misconception is that they look like Mark Zuckerberg, right? That hoodie wearing 20 something. But the reality is that a lot of successful founders are repeat founders.
Absolutely.
This is not your first rodeo. So I hope you will continue to build, and that is the inspiration for you to continue to build. But the data is in the positive, that it takes a typical founder that is successful as a unicorn. I want to say it was like 35 to 45, because you had enough experience, you know how to do this. Because as was said here, I think frankly it is a game, right? You need to hit certain numbers to tell your investors that you need to invest in this idea to get to a certain outcome by a certain time and return that capital. So if you built with that in mind, I think you'll continue to succeed, and the data is in the positive, including for women. And in Endeavor, they have a lot of women-led unicorns. One of the recent one, I think, Insider, led by a Turkish lady.
And I just want to add a quick comment on, and this is the misconception about startup. We have this fantasy of all the startup look like Mark Zuckerberg or the Uber, and we have all this Netflix show, whatever. And most of the people don't look like that. And the journey is not like in 5 years you get $1 billion. To be honest, this was what I believe when I started. And I thought, okay, in 5 years, I will be out of here. I will be in my yacht somewhere. But it's not that. I mean, it's not an entrepreneur. And this is something I learned along the way. you have to enjoy the process. The process can be long, can be tiresome, and you have to enjoy the process, and it can be a long-term process, but you have to be passionate about that process.
If I may add as well, Tatiana, you might have thoughts here, but what we've learned from just our global tour with a lot of founders that have had exited. I mean, I'm thinking about Body specifically, Christy Chong, 140 million. She held on to her equity for a longer time because she couldn't raise funding. It took her 10 years at least to get to that point. But that is generational wealth.
Yeah.
And that's why we care about this, why we invite you into this conversation, because we believe for women and people of color, once you get that exit, right? Hopefully all of you here, let's count the statistics years later, but this will change the face for your families and our future.
The fact that, of course, you have the VC, but you also have the business angel in France and in Europe. It's a huge community, and it's getting larger and larger. You have today a lot of like special groups that invest only between female, only focus with female. I think you should also check that out on Roundtable. Now you have dedicated SPVs that are also focused on women founders. With SISTA, so the NGO, the idea is that we have a program where we help women raise funds and the balance teams. And over the past 3 years, we helped raise 342 million. Just to say that also the VC kind of roadshow is a game, and being kind of trained to the game is also very important. There's different aspects to the fundraising, but again, if you think that an accelerator could be some kind of a help, I really encourage you to go, because it's also a way to get community, learn between peers. I was a lawyer and I learned everything between entrepreneurs. So I really believe the fact that we have to help out, and there's a lot of energy and sorority in that kind of community. So go check them out.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the insights you shared. And also thank you for everybody who flew to Paris to make this happen. My name is Sherian, and I founded a startup. So it's a SaaS in well-being at work. My question is really on the practical side. At which point, what are the numbers we should look at before we start reaching to VCs or maybe to NGOs that can help us go for roadshows, etc.?
First of all, I think that the idea is to be able to meet and to have conversation with a certain number of VCs, because each fund is very different. And as a pre-seed, typically you're going to look mostly around the team and the mission. And we're spending a lot of time with our team trying to understand the founding teams. Why are they working together? Is this team going to make a better return than another team? So I think that the first thing is try to get in conversations with VCs to try to understand what they're looking for. On the other hand, the idea is also to try to get help in the fundraising process if you don't have that kind of network. So either you find a founder that already raised that can, help you out or give you an intro. It's proven that you have 13 times more chances to raise funds when you have an intro by email versus a cold email. That's why network is key, is that, just by sending out emails, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But if you have an introduction, it changes everything. And after, it's like the basic, I guess, year-to-year growth on your members, on your NPS, on your core value that you're building.
If I may, this is why we have a cocktail networking session later to talk about exact strategies. What are the financing options? A lot of big founders, I see Stacey Boyd in the audience as well from the amazing Olivella, a lot of big founders here in the audience. Talk to them about their financing choices. What we've learned from our founders is when they make different choices with funding, things change, right? And that's important to think about your future. There's always going to be pressure on numbers because you have to return certain things to, as mentioned, using the VC model. It literally is 10 years, deliver 3x the returns. So a portfolio model means that from the X amount of startups, there needs to be one home run. And you're being pressured to be that home run. Is this something that works for you? Maybe, maybe not. But ultimately, it is, the goal here is how do we get you to succeed and use venture as a tool? I think there's always a misconception that it is also an end goal, right? We see TechCrunch. Oh, this guy has raised 500 million. Valuation is this. But look what happened in the last couple of years. Empty valuations. So many companies. Miss Skittles is shaking her head because her counterparts who had the same exact business model have literally crashed. But she didn't have the funding, had to get customers and return the numbers. And I see Sandrine from Orange, who's
Yeah.
anxious to make a comment. Sandrine, thank you.
I have two things. One, an announcement, because I'm recruiting 100 women in tech to join incubator based in all French regions. So we're based in Paris, in Montpellier as well, everywhere. One thing that is really important before raising funds is your market fit, your go-to market. If you don't have any revenues for your company, it would be very hard for you to raise funds. So we are focusing on women that master the technology or not, because we are totally open to women in tech, but in tech for good as well. We are always focusing on help you to accelerate your growth. And accelerating your growth is really important for you to make healthy companies and a company that will be happy to be able to be funded. So the first step is the revenue. So this is our main focus, to make the companies attractive, the commercial traction. And this one is really important if you want to do business and to make your company grow really quicker. The second one is we make this one program, the program lasts 1 year, but after this year of incubation, you are part of a big network of 600 women already funded and already supported by Orange. So we have amazing success this year because we went to Vivatech. We have 40 women with us at Vivatech, and we earned 2 prizes, one in artificial intelligence and the second in cybersecurity. So everything is possible.
Yeah.
If we would just bring our forces all together to make the difference.
Thank you, Sandrine. And I mean, it's inspirational. Despite the bad news, I think what we've realized is France is actually one of the leading ecosystems where female GPs have raised in Europe, you know, UK, Netherlands, and then France, right? It's one of the top ecosystems, and a lot of that as well. I know Anne from BPI has made this commentary, but your government has been serving you in many different ways. They invest $1 billion every year, right, into the ecosystem, into tech and VC. But I want to end, you know, we've heard so many things from the role of corporates, the role of family offices. We have some families who flew in as well across Europe to be here, to hear from you. What would be your key takeaways as we walk away here? Let's start with you, Tatiana.
Oh my God, what a pressure. One question. Do you know why ambitious women have flat head? Because we've been tapped on, you know, consistently a lot in the whole life, but it doesn't change anything. What we have in common is that we all have very flat head. You always need a person that believes in their dream to make the dream go through. So my dream was to be a founder. I became a founder. I exited again, and it was an amazing opportunity. At one point, I decided that I wanted to try to find the maximum money to found amazing women, not to help them, but because I believe they overperform. Again, we have a philanthropic arm, but the fund is 100% performance. And I really believe that we're going to prove that women outperform. That's what we're doing. We're raising today 100. We're almost there. The idea is to raise more funds. I hope that you guys are going to raise more fund and only to fund amazing women. And if I could be of any help trying to talk about my journey and how I raised this particular fund, I'll be happy to do so.
Love it.
Good luck.
So invest in women because it's good business. Stephanie.
My key takeaway will be, as women, we learn to be resilient. I think one of the traits that helped me a lot is to do more with less. So you learn that along the way. So you need to be very resilient, very creative with what you can raise. You know, alternative source of funding. We talk about revenue. Think about, taking the most out of your client, because indeed, client can finance a fundraising or can be complementary to fundraising. Always have to think about creatively, because unfortunately, we are not there yet in terms of filling the gap in funding. So you have to be resilient and think outside the box.
Think outside the box. Female founders are resilient by design. And take us home, Liz Matthews.
Oh, that's so much pressure.
Take us home.
So I love the idea of resilience. And also sometimes this resilience is doing the same thing over and over. So I want us to think about resilience and an open mindset or a growth mindset, because you have to be creative and we cannot stop. And so as you're on your journey, for those who are investors in the room, keep investing for those who are founding companies, keep founding for anyone who's part of Dell Technologies. We will never give up investing in small and medium businesses.
Wonderful. And Fleur is just back in time. What is your key takeaway? One piece of advice to the funders and founders in the room.
I can connect to that. It's not a takeaway, but I was thinking, while listening to what we were saying, I think we need some push. We need some policy push. So I'm not sure.
Policy push.
In the same kind of spirit as this, this law we were mentioning, the Kopé-Zimmermann law, maybe it's an incentive that, institutional LPs could commit, to either to impose a minimum threshold. Maybe 25% was too ambitious. Maybe it's 10 or 15%, but at least it's something. And then they would say that, okay, they will give an incentive. Maybe it's a less GP commitment, or it's more carried interest, something like an incentive, not to discriminate those who don't want to commit, but to give, a carrot to those who will make the commitment. So maybe it's something that has to do like this, because in France, we are attached to the principe d'égalité. We cannot treat differently people who are in the same situation. So we cannot do positive discrimination. But there are some smart ways, as they did with Kopé-Zimmermann law, to maybe, give this policy push. Because I think without this push, which can be a sting, sometimes if it need be, I don't think we will achieve any of the billion goals that we want to have.
Thank you, Fleur. And what I will just say is this is exactly what we do at Beyond the Billion, where we work with LPs who see positively GPs that make a dollar commitment to invest more into women-founded companies. So it's not a percentage, but it's a dollar amount. And if there are more LPs that we work with Bank of America, a lot of pension funds, endowments in the US and globally, and we're starting to do a lot more with family offices, a lot in the audience, who are wielding the power of their check, because women are using that influence for transformative ways, and this is where we make the difference. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, please, a round of applause for our panel.
And thanks so much for tuning in this week. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and follow our socials on Sarah Chen Global to get the latest on the show. It would really help me out too if you enjoyed this to rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts and share your favorite episodes with a friend. I'm Sarah Chen-Spellings, and you've been listening to Billion Dollar Moves.